everybody, welcome to another video. Before we get started, I have a massive shout out today. So I'd like to say a huge shout out to the whole of class 10MS at Fishmore School. I'm so sorry, Mr Hoole, but I guess that means you're going to have to buy them all a bacon sandwich. And also a shout out today to Shazad and also to SCR Pablo. Make sure you guys let me know that Mr Hoole has fulfilled his promise and that he has bought you all bacon sandwiches. Today we're going to have a look at Pokemon Go as a case study. So I'm still working through all of the videos that I had to remake from the old channel, and this was one of them. I'm trying to fill in a few gaps based on last year's exam and having a look at what the exam board are now expecting of you guys. I'm going back through all of those videos, and this is sort of what the new channel has allowed me to do, to fill in those gaps and to add in extra bits that I think would really help you for your study. So going through Pokemon Go, then I've broken it down into a case study so that, again, if you are just looking for some quick revision, basically all of the information is here. It's not in as much detail as those individual videos, so do make sure you have a look at those to fill in the gaps within your own revision as well. So our primary audience then really is kind of difficult for Pokemon Go. The primary audience, or as I like to think of it, the intended audience, were meant to be really young. Now the PEGI rating for Pokemon Go is a 3+. Obviously we're not going to have 3-year-olds wandering around on mobile phones trying to play Pokemon Go. So realistically it's going to be that sort of 13 to 18-year-old bracket who make up our primary demographic. The actual Pokemon Go campaign was more likely to involve boys rather than girls. I think stereotypically there was still this idea that boys were going to be the ones who wanted to play Pokemon, but the overall demographic as a whole would be categorized as explorers because it involved getting up and getting out and having a look at your sort of local surroundings and finding out new places. They would obviously also be D to E on that ABC1 system, not necessarily having major full-time work at this point. Now, because our primary audience are going to be children, the secondary audience is likely to be made up of parents of those children. So they'd be roughly 25 to 40-year-olds. And because they want to remain up to date with what their children were playing, we would class them as mainstreamers because at the time it was a mainstream game. So this would place them somewhere within the B to D area of the ABC1 system. Now, obviously, if you've seen the audience video, sorry, it's a weekend and I'm sort of not with it in the minute. If you've seen the audience video for Pokemon Go, you'll know that there was a surprise demographic who actually overtook the intended audience. And so I've sort of categorized them myself as this tertiary or third group, this third demographic. They were the fans of the original series, so they would be 30 to 40-year-olds, and because they wanted to play the game for that nostalgia factor, given that the game initially used the first original generation of Pokemon, we would class them as resigned on that 4C system. Now again, they're likely to be B to D on the ABC1 system, and it's worthwhile noting that this particular demographic did overtake the initial or the intended demographic when it was first released. If we were to have a look at the demographic now for Pokemon Go, I think we'd find that tertiary audience have sort of dropped out as more of those generations have been added, and so it's likely that today the primary audience is as we would expect. Now, one of the reasons that Pokemon Go was so popular was that it used this brand new sort of technology. You have to remember that when we're thinking of AR, first of all, it's augmented reality and not virtual reality. So it's not like you are literally being transported into the game world through something like a VR headset. What it does is it allows more of a crossover between the gaming world and the real world. So you would be able to use the camera function on your phone, or the game would sync with the camera function on your phone so that the Pokemon were projected wherever it was that you were at the time. So you would literally, if you were sitting in your lounge, be seeing the Pokemon in and around your lounge to make it more personal. Another thing to remember is that this augmented reality, although it was very, very popular upon Pokemon Go's release, and Pokemon Go really made augmented reality something that companies had to take note of, it wasn't the first game to use this. Niantic had created a game called Ingress, which is still available and is still played, that used AR before Pokemon Go did. And in fact, the mapping system and the Pokestops and the way that the game worked was really almost copied exactly and identically from Ingress into Pokemon Go. Now, the gameplay of Pokemon Go itself requires players not only to catch them all, which is the idea of the Pokemon franchise as a whole, but it also involves battling other players. So there's this element of healthy competition and also this idea of teamwork as well. There's several elements to the gameplay that have changed since its initial release. So sort of raids and that sort of thing that you can do within the game weren't initially released. But it does allow players to sort of improve their own standing and also their team standing by working together with other players. Or if they want to remain sort of as an individual, they can work towards this individual goal of catching them all. There were several advantages and disadvantages to Pokemon Go as a game. So in terms of our advantages, obviously we've got this new technology that we've mentioned, but also it was marketed as a healthy game. So the idea was that it did something that games didn't really do, and that it allowed users to get up off the sofa, out of their house, and to still be involved in that gaming world. It wasn't marketed as a fitness game. That's slightly different. So although we had things like Wii Fit, which would obviously make you healthier if you played it, this was just your like a regular game, a normal game that had that didn't necessarily have a link to fitness, that was providing people with that sort of healthy outcome. It also helped Niantic and gaming as a whole to sort of move away from consoles, although you could argue that handheld consoles such as the DS did things that are very similar to app gaming and mobile gaming. It's still considered a console. So we had this move away from console gaming to mobile phone gaming, and this obviously allows people to play in a variety of locations using that GPS function on our phone. And tied in with that, Pokemon Go is full of sort of locations across the globe, and it doesn't matter whether you initially are based within the UK, for example. You could take your mobile phone with you on holiday and you would be able to access that world, and you'd be able to get some of the Pokemon that were specific only to that area, despite not necessarily living in that country. It was very, very easy to play, and it's one of the games that have been continually updated with new generations of Pokemon and other gameplay features, which we're going to come back onto in just a second. Now, in terms of the disadvantages, obviously because we were able to play this game everywhere and anywhere at all times of the day, it did increase this addictive nature that games have. And I know that some of you might be sort of rolling your eyes and moaning and groaning a little bit at this point, but there is a link between games and their sort of addictive nature. So Pokemon Go really did fit in with being something that was very, very addictive. Another thing that people found, not necessarily upon its release, but as more and more people played the game across the globe, Pokemon were spawning in really inappropriate situations. So the example that I like to turn to quite a lot is the poison gas Pokemon coughing being found in a Holocaust museum, which is obviously a really inappropriate situation, not only for people to be playing their games, but also for this particular Pokemon to appear. And the reason for that is that obviously the game just used a sort of algorithm or sort of like a formula to decide where the Pokemon would appear, and they didn't necessarily put a real world map over the top of that to find out what Pokemon were appearing and where. As well as this, players linked to that sort of addictive nature became very unaware of their surroundings. So because they were looking at their phone a lot of the time and not looking up and looking at where they were, we had quite a few people who were hit by cars or who were walking out into the middle of the road because they were trying to catch that Pokemon at the same time. It's also had a lot of opportunities for people to use the game in a criminal way. So, for example, there's something within the game called a lure where you can put this out and it will basically mean that Pokemon spawn to that location. You are not the only person who can see those Pokemon spawning at that location and who can see that a lure has been released. So what a lot of criminals were doing was that they were going onto the game, releasing a lure, getting Pokemon to arrive at a particular location, waiting for people who were playing the game to arrive, and then they were mugging them and robbing them and that sort of thing. So it has been linked to crime to an extent as well. But obviously a big disadvantage, which we see a lot with mobile gaming, not just Pokemon Go, is that idea of in-app purchases. There are still a lot of children playing the game who don't understand that an in-app purchase requires real-world money, and so there were a lot of people who found that they had really large bills because their children had been playing Pokemon Go on their phone or had sort of been using their parents' account to get the game, and so they'd racked up quite a lot of debt. Now, in terms of those advantages, one of the things we also need to think about is how Pokemon Go managed to stay on trend. It's not as popular as it was previously, but some of the ways that it's managed to stay relevant is that it obviously releases more generations of Pokemon over a period of time for new demographics to get involved in and to want to play the game. They also hold live events as well, whereby you can access particular items, particular Pokemon, or where they have a particular target or achievement that you guys need to make within that live event. They also have within these live events the release of Pokemon at certain times of the year. So if you're looking at catching them all and you need more psychic Pokemon, you know that they're likely to do that at Halloween. There's been a lot of other sort of theories and hints of what's likely to come within the game. A really useful resource actually that I found for this video was the Wikipedia page, because they summarised one of the press releases that the makers of Pokemon Go gave, and some of the things that they're planning on doing are things like syncing with fitness devices. So as you're walking around playing Pokemon Go, you can be racking up your steps on something like Apple Fitness or Apple Health, and also within your Fitbit as well. They're also planning on allowing trading between players, which I don't know whether that's something that actually exists now. If not, it's definitely something within the pipeline. And the idea that you will be able to battle individual players as well, rather than just battling at gyms. So that's sort of like kind of a big overview of Pokemon Go. Let's break it down into our context, because again, this might be something that you guys have to mention within that section B part of the paper 1. So historically, obviously this has been part of the long-running Pokemon Go franchise, a franchise being a company or an organisation that has lots of different products underneath it. This initial Pokemon franchise began in 1996, so it's been running for well over 10 years now. It was also one of the very first games to use augmented reality, and it really was the game that made augmented reality popular. Now, although the trend has died down, it did die down very quickly within a couple of years. It's been taken over by games such as Fortnite. It's still available, you can still play it, you can still download it, they are still releasing updates for it, it's just not as popular, and so it really does fall into this idea of a sort of trend game. Now, socially, the game allows for more social interaction. Players are able to get out and about within your own community and other communities as well. So not only are you able to discover things that you might not have known existed within your local area, you can go out and explore other areas as well. You're also able to communicate with others by taking and sharing photos of you in-game with Pokemon. So there was quite a trend at the beginning of the game's release whereby if you were using that camera function, you could take pictures of Pokemon spawning, like on your friend's shoulders or all that sort of stuff. Another aspect in terms of our social context is that it allows this competition between players. This is a very common gameplay feature within pretty much any game that you play, but that's again something that allows for this social interaction. Now, in terms of cultural context, the game allows players to customize their own avatar to an extent, so it's enabled us to make it more personal to the demographic and make it more inclusive. It also drew upon the original Pokemon culture, so Pokemon had sort of died down and there wasn't really anything new to make people interested in that sort of culture until Pokemon Go came about. So it particularly helped to increase this sort of interest in the culture, because there was such a gap between the games, or more so there was this idea that we'd expect a sort of new series of Pokemon games to the DS pretty much every year or every other year. This really was something quite different. Now, politically, the game is not affected by politics. Obviously, because it aims itself at a young audience, we wouldn't expect it to be political, but that doesn't mean that there aren't games out there that have a political viewpoint. So maybe one of the things you want to do with this video is to then take your research and your revision into an area where you look at games that have a political focus and why that might be something that Pokemon chose not to include, or where perhaps that political influence is more subtle. Hopefully you found this video really interesting and you found it helpful. Here are our key terms for today. So there's not so many. You could make little definitions for these, add these to your sort of growing compendium of media key terms. Maybe see if you can fit them into your own revision notes or highlight them where you've used them. If you haven't already, do subscribe. I am so thankful for all of you who have subscribed already. Obviously, moving channel, I've taken a massive hit in terms of subscribers, views and comments, and we're getting ever so close to me reaching that 100 subscriber mark. So maybe I'll do a different video, or I'll do something special if we manage to get there. Thank you so much already. If you haven't though, please subscribe. It does help me out. You can hit the button down below, and if you hit the little bell icon next to it, you get instant notifications every time I post a new video. For those of you who want to get in touch with me, so anybody from Mr Hoole's media class, if you want to get in touch with me and let me know that he's fulfilled that promise of getting you guys bacon sandwiches, pop a comment in the comments section below, or get in touch with me through Twitter like a lot of you guys have, at media_revision. I'll do my best to answer every single one of your questions, and I'll see you guys later, maybe next week, maybe tonight, for another video.